Would you like to work 4 days per week with the same pay? Probably yes. Most people would say so. And actually, there's been a very relevant study published in Nature that employees wanted to pursue this calendar as stress levels went down, flexibility and happiness in general in the workplace went up, and most importantly, productivity levels stayed the same. So basically, you worked 80% less and you did more or less the same when it comes to productivity. So if you take a look at the harsh reality at the micro level, well, you could argue that yes, it makes sense. But do you think so? Because if we take a perspective at the global level, maybe it's not the solution we want to pursue, or at very least, the only one. As AI, pensions, and purpose might tell us a different story. Let's get it started first with the study in Nature. This is not too surprising, in my opinion, as in my previous job at the European level, the work week was basically 4 days per week. So Fridays, everybody didn't work. And it might seem a very atypical solution, but it's not that much. We've been changing the work week throughout history quite a lot. And if we take a look at the last 150, 200 years, as productivity has been constantly increasing, we've been able to work less, at least in developed countries, not necessarily in current developing or even emerging countries, which is good news in general. So you have more free time to spend time with your family, to pursue your own profits and to your own hobbies, and so on. So you can have a side hustle or practice any sport you want. So that's great. We don't necessarily are against that. And if you consider as well at the micro level, most likely most companies that work in the knowledge economy, yes, it makes sense. Potentially makes sense to have a 4-day work week. As stress levels might go down, you might have more time for your family, so your happiness and the retention rates within the company might be higher. And yes, it could make sense at the micro level. And actually, most companies that were part of this study wanted to continue having a 4-day work week. So that's pretty understandable. However, there are some limitations, and then there are some global level perspective, and we need to consider the big elephants in the room before we could say that this should be applied everywhere at all costs. Let's first take a look at the limitations. I mean, the companies that pursue voluntarily this study and this experiment were purpose driven, most of them. A traditional company would not most likely be part of this study. So already the ones that took part of it were more or less convinced of it. And also, of course, the answers of the employees tended and were very biased, or at the very least that's the rationale, that a 4-day work week will be beneficial for them. Of course it would, but you don't know in the long run if that makes sense or not. So actually you should try randomized trial rather than self-reporting and voluntarily being part of that study. So that's a limitation. But there's actually 3 bigger elephants in the room. That's why maybe a 4-day work week is part of a solution, something optional, but not something that all companies should pursue so that we can collectively solve humanity's biggest challenges, something that is we're very much focused here in Optimisticus. The first one is AI. We're living now in the age of AI, and we're already facing many disruptions. Some of them are very positive, including productivity gains. So, I mean, as long as the company and yourself in your own job, you're able to carry out the tasks you were used to with less time and with less resources, then it might make sense to have a shorter work week with the same pay. However, this is only partially true for some people. As first of all, some of the employees are being beneficiaries of these AI tools, others are not. And these are the very huge disadvantage and most likely might get dismissed as they're not that much relevant in the company and in the whole economy anymore. So you need to consider that. And therefore, you also need to consider splitting the benefits of the company as equally as possible so that you don't have massive redundancies in an AI world. Of course, taking at the micro level as a company, you might counter argue the opposite. And it might make sense in your case, as you want to pursue higher profitability or a more sound, resilient system when it comes to your finances, as of course is a very big topic. And if EBITDA and your own finances do not work as well as you want to, of course you need to make some readjustments, and AI can help you in that regard. But this is a huge topic that obviously needs to be considered also when doing a 4-day work week. Maybe that needs to be not only reconsidered, but that's a consequence of AI tools, but not of a policy that wasn't considering those AI tools. But this is a debate that will continue to be here, and since this is very volatile, we cannot tell much more about this, as again is a very volatile context, and maybe in 1 year we have a very different perspective. The second one, which is much more harsh, and actually I would say it's the most relevant one, as it's something that we know that if we continue the current trajectory, this will get worse. We're talking about the pension system. So basically, the pension system in most Western countries, and also emerging countries, not necessarily in the West, but for example, China is another case, are dealing with a very tough issue, which is the pension system. As there are more grown-ups that eventually stop working as they reach the 60s and 70s, then you have a younger population that is disproportionately not only younger, of course, but especially cannot be sufficient, or cannot, I would say, the replacement rate is so low that cannot sustain those that want to retire. And the math is very simple. The math doesn't work unless you exponentially increase taxes, among many other solutions, or of course you increase massively your productivity. We're talking here about twice, 3 times, or 4-fold the current productivity in some countries, or you have more workforce or more immigration, or in this case you work more hours. And that was proposed by a McKinsey report that you can check it out in the description below. And the McKinsey report was very, I would say, staggering, as some countries, for example including Spain, needed a 4-fold increase in productivity, as otherwise the country might not be able to sustain the pension system. And this is critical. And actually, if you reduce your work week, and if you maintain the productivity or even slightly increase it, but the total output is not the same, which most likely is the case, as it will be very atypical to do exactly the same job in 4 days than in 5 days for all professions, not some, all professions as of today. That will basically mean that you're having less output than what you needed. Or let's imagine that even the total output is the same one 4 days in comparison to 5 days. Still, you're having a huge productivity crisis, that the model doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, really, you need to work more. So this is going against the current trajectory. We hope we don't have to work more, but the math is the math, And the pension system is, as of today, in a critical situation in most countries. You could counter-argue that when it comes to demographics, it's better to have a 4-day work week than a 5-day work week. And it's true. You might have more children if you have more time to take care of your children, or having more spare time so that you can devote for another entrepreneurial initiative and so on, right? So you have a side hustle. Yes, all of that is true. But the demographics doesn't kick in until 20 or 30 years. The pension system, the problem is from today until 1 or 2 decades, and who knows more, but at the very least, the current 2 decades. And if you have a children today, 2 of them, and they start working in a workplace in 20 to 25 years time, you're still missing those 25 years. So that doesn't solve the pensions problem, right? And then the third one would be the abundance and the purpose-driven one. And even if it's true that a 4-day work week can help you in finding your purpose if you haven't done yet, theoretically, a 4-day work week is an extrinsic lever. An intrinsic one would be your purpose, right? So if your hobby were to be your purpose, then does not matter that much a 4-day work week, a 3-day work week, 5 days, 6 days, because if you develop and build your purpose as your hobby, as your job, then this metric is not that relevant anymore. Of course it is. It would be even better if you worked as your hobby, as a purpose, your whole life, only for 4 days. Yes, that would be even a better scenario. That would be Disneyland, of course. But it's a higher priority to develop your purpose and to work in the field that you love, rather than working less in something that you don't like that much. So our conclusion is that yes, it's more than welcome to have a 4-day work week for those sectors that work, as long as it does not put in a disadvantage the pension system, the potential gains of AI that are currently not being equally distributed, and then if it doesn't put at risk your purpose, your dream, because you might end up being in a very, I would say, comfortable situation that you wouldn't even like or think about developing your purpose, but rather you might only be thinking about working less, getting the same income. But the reality is that developing your purpose and your dreams might be, at the very least, as relevant as working less and getting the same pay. So this is our take. Let us know what you think in the comment below. Do you think that having a 4-day work week makes sense at the global level, considering these additional layers? Let us know in the comment below. And as always, be curious, enjoy life, and if possible, be the change you want to see in the world. See you in the next optimistic adventure.